For Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bring you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's papers. Joining us are David Ornstein, football correspondent for The Athletic, and Henry Winter, co-host of the Football Boardroom podcast. Welcome to you guys, and let's run through those back pages first of all. Starting with the Times, who put it very simply, relegation for West Ham, alongside an image of a devastated Jared Bowen. The Mirror goes with the Spurs safety angle and reports De Zerbi goes bananas. In the Sun, it's all about up and down. They cover the survival fight and the dream season for Arsenal, who now head to the Champions League final in Budapest. There's also news of European sunshine on the sidebar for Sunderland, Bournemouth and Brighton. What a busy final day it has been in the Premier League, and let's now bring in David Ornstein first of all and get some reaction to it all. David, of course, the big story really centres on what was happening at the bottom end of the Premier League table. Just give us your reflections on how it all unfolded, David. Did it unfold as you expected?
Well, I was at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, not the London Stadium. I've just got back from there, and it was as I expected. Yeah, it was a day that Tottenham had in control of their own destiny. The chance was very slim that West Ham would stay up, and I didn't see Tottenham failing to at least secure a draw against Everton, an Everton side that hasn't won since I think March, and I think for the large part of today's game at Tottenham, the Everton players seemed like they weren't fully engaged and certainly not anywhere near their best. And contrast that to the intensity, the desperation of Tottenham, who are vastly improved under Roberto De Zerbi. I know we'll come on to speak about that. The West Ham fans that I know and speak to and had conversations with leading up to today were not hopeful, and understandably so. Fair play, they did their job well with a really good result, but that wasn't ever going to be the main issue for them. It was the game in North London. It's a really sorry tale how West Ham have lost their Premier League status for the first time since 2011, how they've fallen away since the heroics of their European title just a few years ago. It's a failure that any fathers, that there's so much that's gone wrong there on and off the pitch, and it culminates in them having to wake up as a championship team and everything that comes with it. There's going to be a lot of problems there. And Tottenham, the supporters that were all around us in the press box, the media tribune at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium were relieved, of course, and also excited about whether they can start a new chapter and look forward to some better times now they've retained their Premier League status by the skin of their teeth.
Henry, the Mirror focusing more on the Spurs safety side of things, and you can see the emotion there on Roberto De Zerbi's face as you got Spurs over the line. I mean, ultimately they had to get a result, didn't they, because of what West Ham did, Henry? So do they get a degree of praise for how they handled things, at least on the final day? Remembering, just look, third home win of the season for them.
Well, I think De Zerbi certainly deserves a lot of praise. You can see the intensity that he brings to management. He's trying to infuse that into his players, some of them who simply not delivered this season. And I think full praise should also go to the Tottenham fans, who set the tone early, meeting the coach, the atmosphere outside the ground, the atmosphere inside the ground. They were absolutely unconditional in their support of Tottenham Hotspur. And they needed that togetherness, because there's a lot right about Tottenham Hotspur when you look at this magnificent ground, probably the best in the country, up in the top three in Europe of football grounds. And you look at the training ground, absolutely magnificent. And your training ground, see the support's good. They've got one or two good kids in the academy, a good community scheme. But this is an issue, slightly echoing West Ham. This is an issue in the boardroom. This is an issue behind the scenes. This is an issue about leadership. You can talk about leadership on the pitch. Romero, what was he doing going off to Argentina and then coming back? He shouldn't be captain. I can't imagine he'll stay much longer at the club. The club have got to look at bringing in the right leaders. And that is throughout the club, from the boardroom to the dugout. Well, they've got that in the dugout in De Zerbi now. I mean, he's a bit of a jack in the box, but actually that's exactly what Tottenham needs. Someone with that energy, but they need, when they go into recruitment. I mean, look, Conor Gallagher is not the greatest player technically that Tottenham Hotspur have ever had, but he's got that spirit, he's got that fight, he's got that urgency. He understands what it means to play for the shirt, and that's what the fans expect. It's the very minimum these players should be given, and too few have given them that this season.
As far as the Telegraph are concerned, David, De Zerbi saying this can't happen again. So leaning into some of the things that Henry was pointing to there, maybe wanting more leaders to come in over the course of the season. Saying it can't happen again, though, a lot of people connected to Tottenham Hotspur would have thought that last season when they also finished 17th.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say around that is that Tottenham were really focusing towards the end, Ange Postecoglou in particular, on their Europa League campaign, which ended in success, and they weren't seriously threatened by relegation. This season they were, and there are many reasons for that, not least the injuries. No team has suffered injuries like Tottenham, I think it's pretty fair to say, and that has ravaged them. However, the problems have been more fundamental, and Henry's right, fish rots from the head. It goes up to the ownership and through the boardroom and all the way down. And we saw the September departure of Daniel Levy after all those years, and we don't know much about those who are running the club now and how well equipped they are to do so. Certainly in terms of the Lewis Family Trust, influential figures there and haven't even taken the owners and directors test. Of course, they've got Vinay Venkatesham and Johan Lange running it, chief executive and sporting director. They're going to bring in another sporting director. And I think there's an opportunity now to, you know, the penny will finally drop and this ownership will have to recruit heavily. De Zerbi's demanding it in his post-match comments. He talks about having sort of 11 or 12 high-level players who can play for Tottenham, but he wants quite a number more. And he has a dream in his head, he was saying, of what his team will look like heading into next season. Now, he's a combustible figure, enigmatic for sure. You should have seen him on the touchline today. He was absolutely wild, almost came to blows with Jordan Pickford at one point, having arguments with David Moyes. But he is the reason that they've stayed up. He came in at great expense, by the way, a massive contract, and one that did not have a relegation clause to leave or to reduce his salary. So it was an expensive gamble, but it's paid off because the riches of the Premier League are still theirs. And they'll want to really bolster the attacking department in particular because they've got some long-term injuries. But really throughout the team, there's going to be some departures and there needs to be some higher quality reinforcements. They need to pay higher salaries. And finally, if Tottenham are going to get back to competitive status at the top end of the Premier League table, then they really have to sort this out top to bottom and throughout the club because they've got the facilities Henry talks about. They're magnificent, but it's what's on the pitch that matters most to those fantastic supporters, and they won't put up with another season of this. And you imagine De Zerbi won't, and he looks to be the right man to lead them forward.
As far as West Ham are concerned, Henry, this is hugely significant for them, isn't it? This relegation after 14 years in the Premier League. A lot of papers running pictures of a disconsolate-looking Jared Bowen, the captain, the talisman, including the Guardian. Big questions now over what happens in the summer. Will Bowen stay? Will Nuno Espirito Santo stay? It feels like a really big few weeks ahead for the club.
Well, I think Jared Bowen, anyone who's followed his career, know that he's a loyal, pretty steadfast character. Be an interesting conversation with his father-in-law if he did decide to leave. But you can understand it. He's not in the England squad. You know, he's ambitious. He wants to play at the top level, at the Champions League level, and at his best, he certainly deserves to. But Jared Bowen is the least of their problems at the moment. I mean, Fernandes, I'm sure, will go. There'll be a lot of interest in him. Somerville will probably go as well, because this is not simply the cost of of relegation, and it is huge because of the television money going down, even with the parachutes. It's also the fact that earlier this year, West Ham United recorded record losses. So look, this is going to be a brutal period. Big name players are going to go. Unfortunately, the better ones, the ones who could probably help get them out of the division, and I'm sure there'll be staff losses behind the scenes as well. I'm sure some West Ham fans will think about turning their back on the club, not because they don't want to support the team in the Championship, and there's no VAR there, so they might actually be attracted to that, but simply because you could hear the chants coming through the television towards David Sullivan, the incredibly unpopular chairman. And that's really where the reset, the reboot of this famous old club has to start in the boardroom. And judging by the mood of the fans and some of their fairly lively chants today, it's only going to happen, the reboot, was when Sullivan leaves.
You touch on that, Henry, and that's exactly what The Sun reflects on their back page as well. Up, down is the headline. The bottom half of that back page has a photo of David Sullivan there watching on as West Ham got relegated. How much of an issue is that, possibly, David, the sort of disconnect potentially between the supporters, some sections of them, and the owner, maybe some just not being particularly happy, even after all these years on with playing at the London Stadium too?
It's a big problem. It's not new, though, and this is quite historic now. We've seen some really tough times in the relationship between the fan base of West Ham and the hierarchy. It was targeted not just towards David Sullivan, but previously to Karen Brady. She's now departed. Less so, of course, to the more silent partner in it, Daniel Kretinsky, the Czech billionaire. And it'll be interesting to see what his intentions are going forward and what happens with the late David Gold shares. The ownership picture at West Ham is fascinating. They've got an interim chief executive, so they'll have to sort something out on that front. And Henry's right, the boardroom is so important in this situation. Yeah, the animosity's been festering since the Upton Park to London Stadium move. The atmosphere when it gets up is excellent, and there is quite a good connection that Nuno Espirito Santo pointed to, actually, between the players, the actual the protagonists here and the fans this season. They have actually struck up a decent bond, other than I think there was a League Cup defeat when Jared Bowen had a bit of a confrontation with a supporter. There was one match where a young supporter sort of tried to pitch invade on his own. So that's been lingering in the background. There's great dissatisfaction there, and it's not going to be a happy place for West Ham fans. It might be quite an empty place at times in the Championship. Quite a good away day for teams visiting there. It's going to be a real financial hit. There'll be mechanisms in the player contracts to reduce their salaries, but they're losing money, and some of those players are going to be targeted by other clubs. Jared Bowen's under contract until 2030, and then the noises coming out from him in the post-match aftermath interviews are that he's not even thinking about leaving. He wants to help bring the club back up, and that will be a positive noise. But let's see as the summer goes on and whether the water is tested by suitors. They've made such a mess of their recruitment. They've had different directors of football, head of recruitment. They've got no one in that role at the minute. Nuno is doing it with his agent, George Mendes, and David Sullivan. There was Tim Steighton before, Kyle Macaulay. And when you look at players like Fulkrug, who came in at an old age on high money, and James Ward-Prowse, who's not played, and there are so many examples of recruitment errors there, and that's really at the core of this. West Ham rallied, and Nuno sort of got a tune out of them for a period, but it was really that defeat at Newcastle where he got the team selection wrong that put paid to their chances. Henry talked about all the players. What about the future of Nuno? I think that's going to be a really big topic of conversation. They probably don't have an appetite to make another change after obviously what's gone before with multiple alterations in the dugout. But I think there's going to have to be some tough conversations. Is Nuno going to lead this club forward? Are they going to bounce straight back? Actually, David Sullivan's record with Birmingham and West Ham of bringing teams back after relegation is quite strong. But clearly the supporters are dissatisfied with those running the club, and you can understand their frustration.